A freezing dog showed up at his door. What happened next changed everything. The snowstorm came without warning, sweeping down from the mountains with a ferocity that rattled the windows of Miles Thompson's secluded home. Thick flakes spiraled through the air, swirling in frenzied gusts that howled like ghosts lost in the cold. Miles watched from his kitchen window, the world beyond disappearing beneath a relentless blanket of white. Even for a small mountain town like Windermere, this was a storm of rare intensity. Miles sighed, wrapping his hands around a steaming mug of tea as he leaned against the counter. The flickering fireplace in the adjacent room cast a warm glow, filling his modest house with a comfortable stillness. It was a night meant for solitude, the kind Miles had grown accustomed to since moving here 5 years ago, trading city noise for the whisper of pine trees and the silence of snow. He'd come to Windermere to escape the chaos of his past life, to find peace in his craft. As a pottery artist, he spent his days shaping clay into graceful forms, his hands working rhythmically at the wheel in his garage-turned studio. There, surrounded by shelves cluttered with half-finished vases and bowls coated in fine clay dust, Miles found a purpose that filled his days, but did little to soothe his nights. Tonight was no different. The storm outside only deepened the silence within, and as he took another sip of his tea, Miles felt a familiar pang of loneliness echo through the room. He shook it off, turning away from the window. Just then, a faint sound cut through the howling wind. A whimper, so soft he almost dismissed it as his imagination. But there it was again, a muffled cry that sent a chill down his spine, sharper than the winter air. Setting his mug down, Miles strained to listen, his heart beating faster. The sound came once more, weak and desperate, barely audible beneath the roar of the storm. Without a second thought, he grabbed his heavy coat and boots, his body moving on instinct. The cold struck him like a slap as he opened the door, snowflakes swirling in a blinding dance. He stepped onto the porch, the icy wind biting at his face, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The whimper came again, more distinct now, carried by the gusts from somewhere near the steps. Squinting against the snow, Miles descended the porch, his boots sinking deep into the drifts that piled against the house. Then he saw her, a golden retriever, trembling violently, her fur matted with snow and ice. She was curled into herself, as if trying to disappear into the cold, her amber eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. The dog looked up as he approached, her gaze locking onto his, pleading and helpless. Miles's heart twisted. She was clearly terrified, her body quaking with the effort to stay upright. As he moved closer, he noticed the swell of her belly, rounded and heavy with life. She was pregnant, and from the looks of it, very close to giving birth. "Oh, God!" the words escaped his lips in a whisper. How long had she been out here? The dog shivered uncontrollably, her legs buckling as she tried to stand. Instinct took over. Miles crouched beside her, his voice gentle despite the urgency pounding in his chest. "Hey, it's okay. I've got you." He reached out, letting her sniff his hand. Her nose was cold, her breath faint clouds of vapor in the frigid air. She didn't pull away. She was too weak to resist. Miles took off his scarf, wrapping it around her trembling body. "Come on, girl. Let's get you out of this cold." Carefully, he slid his arms under her, lifting her against his chest. She was lighter than he expected, her ribs pressing against his arms through her thin coat. As he cradled her, she rested her head against his shoulder, her eyes drifting shut. "Hang on," he whispered, shielding her as best as he could from the merciless wind as he hurried back inside. The warmth of his home enveloped them as Miles kicked the door shut, shutting out the storm's fury. He laid the dog gently on a soft throw blanket near the fireplace, stoking the flames until the room glowed with heat. She curled into the blanket, her body shuddering as she adjusted to the sudden warmth. Miles ran to the kitchen, filling a bowl with lukewarm water. When he returned, the dog's eyes followed him, weary but alert. He set the bowl beside her, crouching down to speak softly. "Here you go. Drink up. You're safe now." She hesitated before leaning forward to lap at the water, her throat working with desperate gulps. Miles watched her with growing concern, noting the dirt matted into her golden fur, the scratches on her paws, and the way her body sank into the blanket, exhausted beyond measure. Where had she come from, and who could abandon her in this condition? His gaze softened as he looked at her swollen belly, rising and falling with shallow breaths. Whoever she belonged to, it was clear she had known love once. There was a gentle grace about her, even in her suffering, that spoke of trust and loyalty. Miles felt a pang of anger at the thought of her being abandoned, left to fend for herself in this brutal storm. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing her head. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, wide and vulnerable, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Miles's voice softened. "You're not alone anymore. I'll take care of you." The words surprised him. He hadn't meant to say them, but once they were out, they felt right, like a promise he was meant to keep. The dog's body relaxed, her eyes fluttering shut as she surrendered to sleep. Miles sat back, his heart pounding, the gravity of the situation settling in. He had no experience with dogs, let alone a pregnant one. But as he watched her breathe, curled up in his home, he knew he couldn't turn away. She had come to him for a reason, braving the storm to find his door. Maybe, just maybe, she was meant to find him. And maybe he needed her just as much as she needed him. As the fire crackled softly and the storm howled outside, Miles stayed by her side, his own solitude fading in the glow of her quiet trust. The storm raged through the night, wind howling like a living thing as snow piled high against the windows. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the scent of burning wood and the soft, rhythmic breaths of the golden retriever curled near the fireplace. Miles watched her from his armchair, sleep eluding him as he kept vigil over his unexpected guest. She looked more peaceful now, her body no longer shivering, her golden fur glowing in the firelight. Yet the gentle rise and fall of her swollen belly was a stark reminder that she was not alone. She carried life within her, fragile and vulnerable, just as she herself had been only hours before. Miles's heart twisted as he thought of how close she had come to freezing out there, lost in the storm with no one to help. He glanced at the snow still whipping against the glass, the world beyond his walls swallowed by white chaos. Fate had brought her to his door, but what kind of life had she known before this? Who had let her get so close to death? His eyes wandered back to her rounded belly, and a wave of apprehension washed over him. He knew nothing about dogs, let alone how to help one give birth. The thought sent his heart racing. What if something went wrong? What if she needed help he couldn't provide? The question swirled in his mind, but as if sensing his unease, the dog stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were amber, warm and wise, locking onto his with a calmness that steadied him. She watched him for a moment, her gaze soft and trusting, then closed her eyes again, her body curling tighter into the blanket. A lump formed in Miles's throat. She trusted him, completely and without question. It was a trust he had done nothing to earn, yet it wrapped around him, warm and binding. He wouldn't let her down. He couldn't. Not after she had fought so hard to survive and found her way to his door. Just then, she let out a low whine, her body shifting restlessly. Miles's heart jumped. He moved to her side, his voice gentle but urgent. "Hey, are you okay?" Her eyes opened, wide with discomfort, and another whimper escaped her lips. Her body tensed, muscles rippling under her golden coat. It didn't take long for Miles to realize what was happening. She was in labor. Panic seized him. He scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping over the coffee table. "Oh God, oh no, no, no. I'm not ready for this." But there was no stopping it. Nature had its own timing, and she was at its mercy. Miles forced himself to breathe, his hands shaking as he grabbed every blanket he could find, layering them around her to make a warm, safe nest. She needed him to be strong, to be calm, even if he was falling apart inside. Kneeling beside her, he spoke softly, his voice trembling but steady. "It's okay, girl. I'm here. I won't leave you." She looked at him, her amber eyes glassy with pain, but she didn't cry out. There was a quiet strength about her, a resolve that moved him deeply. She trusted him, and that was enough to keep him grounded. The first contraction came hard, her body tensing with a force that made her shudder. Miles watched in helpless awe, his heart breaking at the sight of her suffering, but unable to do anything except whisper words of encouragement. "You're doing great. Just hang on. Just a little longer." She whimpered softly, her head pressing into his hand, her body trembling with effort. Time became a blur, each moment stretched by anxiety and anticipation. Miles lost track of how long they stayed like that, his hand on her head, his voice a constant murmur of comfort. And then, just as dawn began to lighten the edges of the storm-darkened sky, the first puppy arrived. It was tiny, a fragile bundle of wet fur that wriggled helplessly against the blanket. Miles's breath caught, his chest tightening with emotion he didn't know he was capable of feeling. The mother dog moved instinctively, her nose nudging the newborn closer to her body, her tongue gently cleaning its fur. The tiny creature let out a soft, pitiful squeak, its voice small but strong. Miles felt his eyes burn, tears welling as he watched life unfold before him. He had never seen anything so raw, so pure. The miracle of birth, the beginning of everything. But there was no time to linger in awe. Another contraction gripped her, and then another puppy was born, followed quickly by a third. Each one was tiny, delicate, yet full of life, their cries filling the room with sound and hope. The golden retriever worked tirelessly, her exhaustion evident, but her love unwavering as she cared for each pup, cleaning them and guiding them to her warmth. Miles could only watch, his heart swelling with admiration for her strength, her courage. When the fifth and final puppy arrived, she lay back with a shuddering sigh, her body spent but her eyes soft with love, as she curled protectively around her newborns. Miles leaned back, his own body trembling from the adrenaline and emotion. 5 tiny lives born into the warmth and safety of his home. 5 little miracles who had been just a heartbeat away from death in the cold. He watched as they squirmed and wiggled, their small mouths instinctively searching for nourishment, their golden fur still damp but already showing the soft glow they would grow into. The mother nuzzled each one in turn, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but her spirit fierce and proud. Miles felt his throat tighten again, his heart aching with a strange, beautiful pain. He reached out, his hand trembling as he gently stroked her head. "You did it. You saved them." Her eyes met his, and he could have sworn she understood. She let out a soft whine, her tail giving the faintest of wags. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. As the storm outside began to wane, the snow settling into soft mounds of white, Miles sat beside the mother and her puppies, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. He felt a warmth he hadn't known in years, a sense of purpose that filled the hollow spaces inside him. They had come into his life out of nowhere, changing everything in an instant. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he would face it with them, by their side no matter what. As dawn painted the sky with shades of gold and pink, Miles whispered softly, "Welcome to the world, little ones. You're safe now." And for the first time in a long while, he felt truly alive. The storm finally passed, leaving the mountain town blanketed in pristine white. Sunlight spilled through the frost-rimmed windows, illuminating Miles's living room with a golden glow. It was quiet now, the howling winds replaced by the soft crackle of the fireplace and the faint murmurs of new life. Miles sat cross-legged on the floor, his back resting against the armchair, as he watched the golden retriever curl protectively around her 5 puppies. They were impossibly small, nestled against their mother's belly, their tiny mouths suckling instinctively. Their fur was a pale, damp gold that gleamed faintly in the firelight, and their little bodies wiggled and squirmed as they competed for warmth and space. Miles's heart softened at the sight, a warmth spreading through his chest that chased away the lingering cold of the storm. He had witnessed the miracle of their birth, a transformation that unfolded before his eyes, raw and unfiltered. It was beautiful, chaotic, and deeply moving. He never imagined his quiet life could be interrupted by something so small, yet so powerful. The mother dog looked up, her amber eyes meeting his with a softness that spoke of gratitude and trust. She had let him into her world, allowed him to be part of this miracle, and in doing so, she had changed something inside him. Miles smiled, his voice a gentle whisper. You're incredible, you know that. She let out a soft huff, her tail giving a faint wag as if acknowledging his words. He reached out, his fingers brushing over her head, his touch tender and reverent. I think you need a name, he murmured, his gaze drifting over her golden fur, now fluffed and clean after the ordeal. How about Mia? It suits you. Her ears perked up, and for a moment her eyes brightened, a spark of recognition passing between them. Mia it is, Miles said, his heart lifting. Welcome home, Mia. His gaze shifted to the puppies, their tiny bodies pressing closer to Mia's warmth. There were 5 in total, each one unique despite their identical golden hues. One was particularly bold, pushing his way to the front, his tiny paws digging into his siblings with fierce determination. Miles chuckled. You're a fighter, aren't you? I think I'll call you Max. Max let out a small, squeaky grunt, his mouth latching onto Mia's belly with a voracious appetite. His siblings wriggled around him, their soft cries filling the room with a melody of innocence. Next to Max was a smaller pup with a calmer demeanor, her tiny body content to curl up against Mia without fuss. You'll be Luna, Miles decided, smiling at her peacefulness. The others earned names just as easily. Blaze, the adventurous one who constantly explored the edges of the blanket, was named for his fiery spirit. Daisy, the softest and most delicate, had an air of sweetness that melted Miles's heart. And finally Buddy, who seemed to enjoy snuggling up to Mia more than the others, his tiny head often resting on her paws. Miles watched them with a sense of wonder, their little personalities already blooming before his eyes. He had never thought he'd be naming puppies, let alone caring for them. Yet here he was, his home now a nursery for new life. It was overwhelming, but it was also the most fulfilling thing he had ever experienced. The thought of their future filled him with hope. He would give them everything they needed, no matter the cost. They were his responsibility now, and he wouldn't let them down. Days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and careful watchfulness. Miles learned to adjust his life around the needs of Mia and her puppies. His once quiet home was now filled with the soft sounds of tiny paws and the gentle whimpers of hungry mouths. He found himself waking at odd hours, checking on them, ensuring the fire was warm enough and that Mia was comfortable. Mia proved to be an exceptional mother. Her patience was endless as she cleaned and nursed her puppies, her body curled protectively around them. Yet she never turned away from Miles. She watched him with those amber eyes, her trust unwavering as he moved around her makeshift nest, replenishing her food and water, whispering words of encouragement. In those moments, Miles felt a bond forming, one that went beyond words. He had been alone for so long, but now his house was filled with life, warmth, and connection. His heart was opening, each day expanding, to make room for the love that grew steadily inside him. But it was Max who captured his heart most fiercely. The little pup was bold and adventurous, always the first to explore, his tiny nose poking into every corner of the blanket. Miles found himself laughing more, his days brightened by Max's antics as he tried to climb over his siblings or gnaw at Mia's tail. There was something about Max's spirit, his fearless curiosity, that reminded Miles of himself before life had made him so guarded. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the snow-covered mountains, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Miles sat by the fire, Max nestled in his lap. The tiny pup was fast asleep, his small body warm and trusting against Miles's chest. Miles looked down, his fingers stroking the soft golden fur, his heart swelling with an affection so deep it almost hurt. He had never felt so connected, so needed. Max yawned, his tiny mouth opening wide before he nuzzled closer, his breathing soft and steady. Miles's eyes blurred, his chest tightening as he whispered, "You're my little buddy, Max. I promise I'll always protect you." The vow hung in the air, a promise born from the deepest part of his heart. He knew then that no matter what happened, Max was meant to stay with him. It was a certainty that anchored him, giving him a purpose he didn't know he was searching for. As the fire crackled and the shadows danced along the walls, Miles leaned back, his eyes drifting shut, Max's warmth grounding him. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. He had found his family, his heart no longer hollow but full and beating strong. The storm had brought them together, changing everything in a single night. It was more than coincidence, it was fate. And as Miles held Max close, he realized he was no longer alone. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Winter's grip on Windermere began to loosen, the snow outside softening under the pale sunlight that stretched across the mountain town. Days grew longer, marked by the slow thaw and the faint drip of melting icicles. Inside Miles's house, however, the warmth was constant, radiating from the fireplace and the vibrant energy of 5 playful puppies who were discovering the world for the first time. Mia was a patient mother, watching over her little ones with a vigilant eye. But even she could not keep up with Max's boundless curiosity. The tiny pup had grown bolder each day, his legs stronger and more coordinated as he tottered around the living room, his nose exploring every nook and cranny. Max's siblings were never far behind, their clumsy paws slipping on the wooden floor as they chased each other with excited yips. Miles watched them from his armchair, his heart light as laughter bubbled out of him. He hadn't felt such joy in years. His once quiet home now echoed with the soft thuds of playful tumbles and the sweet melody of puppy barks. It was chaos, beautiful and wild, and Miles found himself embracing every second of it. Max, in particular, had a knack for finding trouble. One morning, Miles awoke to the sound of muffled grunts and found Max tangled in a roll of yarn he'd accidentally pulled from a basket near the fireplace. The golden thread wrapped around his tiny body, his eyes wide with confusion as he tried to wriggle free. Miles couldn't help but laugh as he gently untangled the little troublemaker. "You're a handful, Max, but I wouldn't change a thing," he said, rubbing the pup's belly as Max wagged his tail in delighted agreement. With each passing day, the bond between Miles and Max grew stronger. The little pup followed him everywhere, his curious eyes watching Miles's every move. Whether it was fixing breakfast, tending to the fire, or working on his pottery in the garage, Max was there, his tiny paws padding after him, his presence a constant comfort. Miles had never known how much he needed companionship until Max came into his life. It was as if the little pup had taken up residence not only in his home, but in his heart. Yet it wasn't just Max who had changed him. Mia, with her gentle spirit and unwavering trust, had also found a place in his soul. She watched him with those wise amber eyes, always patient, always understanding. She never demanded anything, but her presence was a quiet assurance, a reminder that love could be unconditional and pure. One evening, as the puppies dozed in a tangled heap by the fire, Mia rested her head on Miles's lap, her body warm and solid against him. He stroked her fur, his fingers brushing through the soft golden strands, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You saved me, Mia. I didn't even know I needed saving, but you did. You and your babies. You brought my heart back to life." Mia's eyes closed, a contented sigh escaping her, as if she understood every word. Miles's throat tightened, his chest aching with emotion. He hadn't spoken to anyone about his loneliness, the hollow ache that had followed him since losing his parents years ago. He had buried himself in his work, isolated himself in this mountain town, thinking solitude was the answer. But Mia had shattered that illusion the night she knocked on his door, begging for warmth and kindness. She had given him purpose, connection, and a reason to wake up each morning with hope. It was early one morning, just as dawn painted the sky in shades of lavender and pink, that Miles decided to take Mia and the puppies outside for the first time. The snow had melted enough to reveal patches of grass, and the air was crisp but bearable under the brightening sun. Max was the first to bound out the door, his excitement palpable as his paws touched the cold earth. His siblings followed, their tiny bodies bouncing with unsteady enthusiasm as they explored the world beyond the 4 walls they'd known since birth. Mia watched them closely, her tail wagging gently as she herded them away from the deeper drifts of snow. Miles stood on the porch, his arms crossed as he smiled at the joyful chaos before him. The puppies tumbled and played, their golden fur gleaming under the sunlight, their laughter infectious as they chased each other through the patches of melting snow. Max was a blur of energy, his nose buried in the snow one moment, his body rolling down a small slope the next. He yipped with pure delight, his eyes sparkling as he climbed back up and did it all over again. Miles laughed, the sound echoing across the yard, his heart full to bursting. How had he ever thought he could live without this? Without them? Mia trotted over to him, her head bumping against his knee as if to remind him she was the reason for all of this. He scratched behind her ears, his voice tender. You brought light back into my life, Mia. I'll never be able to repay you for that. She looked up at him, her amber eyes soft and knowing, and in that moment, Miles understood. She had come to him not just to survive, but to heal him. To mend the broken pieces of his heart he didn't even realize were shattered. The puppies continued to play, their joyous barks filling the crisp morning air, and Miles realized he was no longer afraid of the future. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he wouldn't face it alone. Not with Mia and Max by his side, not with this family he never expected, but could no longer imagine living without. As the sun rose higher, bathing the yard in golden light, Miles felt a peace he had been searching for his whole life. It was in the warmth of Mia's fur under his hand, in Max's playful bark as he tumbled down the hill once more, in the soft yips of Luna, Blaze, Daisy, and Buddy as they wrestled in the snow. It was in the love that filled his home, his heart. He had found his purpose, his reason to hope, and his reason to stay. Miles leaned back against the porch railing, his eyes never leaving his little family as they played beneath the morning sun. He was no longer alone. He was exactly where he was meant to be, and for the first time in a long while, he was truly, beautifully happy. Spring arrived slowly in Windermere, the snow retreating under the sun's growing warmth, revealing the green earth that had slumbered beneath winter's icy grip. The mountain air was fresh, tinged with the scent of pine and budding flowers, and the world seemed to stretch awake with the promise of renewal. Inside Miles's house, change was also in the air, though it weighed heavier than he had anticipated. The morning had started like any other, sunlight spilling through the windows, the golden retriever puppies tumbling over each other in a lively bundle of fur and mischief. Max was at the center of it all, his bold spirit leading his siblings through a game of chase, his tiny barks echoing with unfiltered joy. Mia watched over them with her usual patience, her amber eyes soft with love. But Miles's heart felt heavy as he stood at the window, a printout clutched tightly in his hand. The words on the missing dog poster were unmistakable. Lost golden retriever, Luna, pregnant, last seen near Windermere Trails. Family heartbroken. Please help bring her home. The photograph showed Mia, her golden fur shining, her eyes full of the same gentle spirit that had saved him from his loneliness. Her real name was Luna, and she had a family out there who was missing her, searching for her, waiting for her return. Miles's throat tightened as he looked at her, resting peacefully by the fire, unaware that her world was about to change. His heart ached at the thought of losing her, of saying goodbye to the dog who had taught him to love again. But he knew what he had to do. It was the right thing, the only thing. As painful as it was, he owed it to her to reunite her with the people who loved her first. But the decision did nothing to ease the ache in his chest. He sank into his armchair, his fingers brushing over Max's soft fur as the puppy nuzzled into his lap, his bright eyes filled with innocent trust. Miles felt his chest tighten, a sharp pain cutting through him as he realized Max would leave too. They all would. He tried to imagine his house without them, without the playful yips that echoed down the hallway, without the soft warmth of puppies curled up beside him as he read by the fire. It was unthinkable. He had never wanted a family, never thought he needed one. But now the thought of letting them go felt like ripping his heart out. Still, he knew he couldn't be selfish. They weren't his to keep. They were a gift that was never meant to be permanent. Taking a deep breath, Miles picked up his phone and dialed the number on the poster, his voice trembling as he explained who he was and what he had found. The woman on the other end wept with relief, her words broken with gratitude as she told him how much they had missed Luna, how devastated her children had been when she went missing. Miles's chest tightened, the final thread of his hope unraveling. He set the date for their reunion, each syllable a knife that cut him open. It was only a few days away. The end was coming faster than he was ready to face. He spent those days in a haze of bittersweet joy and heartbreak. Every moment with Mia, or rather Luna, felt more precious, more fleeting. He watched her play with her puppies, her love for them so pure and fierce that it brought tears to his eyes. She was a remarkable mother, gentle and protective, her spirit unwavering even after everything she had endured. He watched Max grow bolder, his curiosity leading him into every corner of the house, his tiny nose sniffing out every secret. Miles followed him with a smile, his heart cracking under the weight of knowing it was all temporary. He tried to capture every moment, every bark, every nuzzle, burning them into his memory so he could carry them with him long after they were gone. The morning of the reunion dawned bright and clear, the sun climbing over the mountains with a golden light that seemed almost cruel in its beauty. Miles woke to the sound of puppies stirring, their small bodies wriggling awake as they piled onto him, Max leading the charge with a playful growl. Miles laughed, his arms wrapping around them as they tumbled across his bed, their energy boundless, their innocence a balm to his breaking heart. He held Max a little longer, burying his face in the pup's soft fur, his throat tightening. "I love you, buddy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'll always love you." Max licked his cheek, his tiny tail wagging as if to say he understood. Miles's vision blurred, his chest aching as he let go. The drive to the park was silent, Mia resting her head on his lap, her eyes watching him with a softness that broke him all over again. The puppies slept in the back seat, oblivious to the change awaiting them. Miles's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his heart pounding as the car pulled into the lot, the familiar ache of goodbye settling heavy in his chest. A family stood by the playground, their eyes widening as they saw Mia leap from the car, her tail wagging furiously as she ran to them, her joy palpable. The woman fell to her knees, her arms wrapping around Mia's neck, her tears glistening in the sunlight. Two children cried out, their voices breaking with joy as they hugged her, their faces buried in her fur. It was beautiful. It was devastating. Miles watched, his heart shattering as Mia's tail wagged with the fierce happiness of a dog who had finally found her way home. He fought back tears as the family scooped up the puppies, their laughter ringing out as they held the tiny bundles of golden fur. It was perfect, exactly how it was meant to be, and it tore him apart. The woman turned, her eyes softening as she approached him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You saved her. You saved them all." Miles tried to smile, his voice breaking as he replied, "They saved me too." She hugged him then, her gratitude wrapping around him like a balm, easing the ache just a little. "I can't take them all," she said softly, her gaze drifting to Max, who was watching Miles with wide, pleading eyes. "You should keep him. I think he belongs with you." Miles's heart stopped, hope breaking through the grief. "Really?" She nodded, her smile gentle. "I see the way he looks at you. He's already home." Miles felt his chest crack open, joy flooding through him as he knelt down, Max launching into his arms with an excited bark. He held the puppy close, his tears spilling as Max licked his face, his tail wagging fiercely. "You're staying with me, buddy," Miles whispered, his voice trembling. "You're mine." As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting golden light over the park, Miles watched Mia and her puppies with their family, his heart full of love and gratitude. They had found their way home, and so had he. He turned back to his car, Max nestled in his arms, his heart no longer hollow but complete. The storm had brought them together, but love had made them a family, and Miles knew that no matter what the future held, he would never be alone again. He had Max, he had love, and he was finally, beautifully home. This story reminds us of the incredible power of compassion and the way love can find us even when we least expect it. It shows how opening our hearts to others, even in the most unlikely moments, can change our lives forever. Miles didn't just save a dog from the cold, he saved himself from the loneliness that had kept him isolated for so long. In caring for Mia and her puppies, he discovered the healing strength of connection, trust, and unconditional love. It's a beautiful reminder that sometimes life's most profound gifts come from the courage to open our doors and our hearts. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. If you were touched by this story and want to experience more tales of hope, love, and resilience, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue sharing stories that inspire and uplift. Until next time, remember to be kind, be compassionate, and never underestimate the impact of love.